Hello, church. Welcome to this week's message. My name is Henry Loke. This is God's Feeding Station. Great to be with you again this week as we continue in Reclaiming Surrendered Ground by Jim Logan. Today is a somewhat uncomfortable subject, a little touchy subject. We're talking about sexual bondage today. Logan shares some sobering statistics and went and did some research, and the numbers I found concerning this type of thing is frightening and mind-boggling, but reality nonetheless. Logan shares this statistic from his counseling ministry that 90% of those seeking help are men, and the majority of the struggle is with sexual sin. And when you look at the numbers will help us understand why. The porn industry generates between $10 to $13 billion annually just here in the United States. Over 420 million websites are dedicated to adult content, accounting for nearly 30% of all internet traffic. 130,000 new videos are produced every month, and this represents a massive assault on purity and holiness and all that is right with God. Satan is absolutely behind all of it, but that doesn't let us off the hook, right? The statement, Satan, the devil made me do it, doesn't wash, because that's not an excuse, because we make the choice whether we want to indulge in this stuff or not. So we need to be honest with ourselves. This is somewhat of a soft target for men. Men seem to be really susceptible to this temptation. The average age of first exposure to pornography is at age 11. And by age 18, about 80% of young men have already encountered or been exposed to pornography. But this isn't just a male problem. By age 18, 52% of young women have also been exposed. So that's more than half of our daughters, our sisters, our wives, right? All of these women entering adulthood have already been exposed to this. And so men will often seek help, but women seem to struggle in silence. And they often carry a deeper shame because the general belief is that this is mainly a male problem. And even when women don't have an issue with it, they still suffer because of the husband's sin. Right? Because what goes through their heads then is, okay, what's wrong with me? Why am I not good enough? Why does he need to go there for satisfaction? I must be a failure as a wife, failure as a woman. And so while it's the man's sin, it is just not the man who suffers. And the consequences often come upon the whole family as well. So entire generations, men and women, are both entering adulthood already bound by sexual strongholds. And it's effective. From a Satan perspective, it's effective because there's a lot of shame and guilt that goes with this. And Satan uses this as a weapon to weaken men as leaders in the church and in their homes. And he also uses it to silence women because they feel they can't speak up about their struggles. So he isolates us, he silences us, and he convinces us we're the only ones that deal with this. And once trapped, many people feel hopeless. And this is exactly what Satan wants. He wants us to think that nothing can be done to solve the problem. Because remember what a stronghold is, right? It's a mindset imprinted upon us by the lies of Satan that causes us to think the things that we do are against God and cannot be changed. That's what Satan does. But there is hope. And the first thing we have to do is come to grips with the simple fact that sin and lust can never be satisfied. and going through counseling for my anxiety and talking, because I've dealt with these things. I am not going to sit here and lie to you and say, yep, I've never come across this stuff. I've never had to deal with it. I've had to deal with it. And in talking about these things to one of my counselors at the time, he talked about, he made the analogy to drug overdoses. And he had a graph, right? And on this side, from a drug perspective, on this side was the high you feel, and on this side was the amount that you had to take. And so you have this graph, and you take the drug, and you get to the point where you find this high. And once you experience that the first time, you struggle to get there again because the drug doesn't have the same effect that it did the first time. So you fall down this side of the kind of the bell curve, trying to reach that high again. And the problem becomes the higher the dosage, right? You keep failing to reach that high until finally you take too much of the drug, you go over the top of the curve into where you overdose. And it's akin to what we're talking about here, because you feel a high or whatever it is, a sense of excitement, whatever you want to call it, in the sexual sin side, and then you want to recreate that satisfaction. But what you quickly find out is you cannot do that. Right? No matter what the sin is, and it doesn't matter what the lust is, it doesn't matter what the sin is, right? It will never totally satisfy you. Whether it's more sex or more money or bigger houses or different wives or, more expensive cars or more drums or whatever it may be, right? It's not just sexual bondage. It's whatever kind of lust that abides in your heart. You can never satisfy that lust because it's never enough. So just like the drug thing, at what point do you overdose and just blow up your entire life? But see, this is how Satan works. He doesn't want us just dabbling in the shallows of sin. He wants us in the deep water. He wants us in over our head so that we feel we're drowning and there's not a damn thing we can do about it. And then our bondage threatens others as well. Because our kids, if you have a family, our kids are sensitive to sin. Again, regardless of what the sin is. Alcohol, drugs, whatever. A myriad of things that kids are very attuned to that will affect them down the road as well. Logan tells a story about this kid named Carl, who, one day found his dad's porn magazines under the bottom drawer in the dresser. So the dad either took the drawer out and put the magazines in there or somehow got them under the drawer and closed the drawer. And Logan said to him, "What made you look there?" And Carl says, "I don't know. I just one day had the thought to look under there." Well, who do we think implanted that seed? Right? That Satan specializes in that type of approach. So there's hope. That's the fortunate thing. There's always hope, and there's hope with God. And if we turn to Romans 6, that's where we find answers. And when you read this chapter in the Bible, you see its problem and solution. Start with Romans 6, verse 12. "Let not sin therefore reign in your mortal body to make you obey its passions." He uses the word reign there. That begs the question, who is sitting on the throne of our lives? Or what is sitting on the throne of our lives? Whatever it is, Paul tells us in that verse, it makes us obey that. Right? Lusts are strong desires. Again, doesn't have to be sexual sin, can be anything. All those things I just named. But whatever it is, if it reigns over us, we must obey it. But then in verse 13, Paul says this, "Do not present yourself members to sin as instruments for unrighteousness." but present yourselves to God as those who have been brought from death to life, and your members to God as an instrument for righteousness. This involves choice, doesn't it? It involves choice. We are to make the choice to not yield ourselves to unrighteousness, because if we do, the sin then will dominate us. And then Paul tells us in the next verse, for sin will have no dominion over you, since you are not under law, but under grace. Now jump to verse 16. Do you not know that if you present yourselves to anyone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of the one whom you obey, either of sin, which leads to death, or obedience, which leads to righteousness? So we have a choice. What are those choices? We can either serve sin, which leads to death, or we can serve righteousness. And if we serve sin, then we are slaves to that which once was a choice. Excuse me. We had a choice whether or not to obey the sin or not. And if we choose the sin, the choice is made, and now we are slaves to that. And sin cuts us off from God. It brings spiritual death. So when we live in bondage by choice, we cut ourselves off from God, who is the very person who can help us out of the mess we're in. Right? Our bond of fellowship with God is broken. Neil Anderson, who wrote Bondage Breaker, and I think Doug and I did a series on that in the broadcast. I have to find that. We might have to run that at some point when our Matthew thing is over. But Neil Anderson says that in place of this fellowship with God, we form unnatural bondings, or what we call soul ties. And soul ties are very powerful. When you see a woman who goes back to a man over and over again, she will return to a man who constantly beats her. In part, that's why. That soul tie to that person is very strong. And so it's an unnatural tie, and it needs to be broken, but it's a spiritual tie, and it can only be broken by God. Do you remember, excuse me, do you remember the Tanya Harding, Nancy Kerrigan thing, where Tanya Harding's husband whacked Nancy Kerrigan on the knee? I don't know if it was a crowbar or whatever it was. I remember how Tanya Harding defended her husband over and over again, even though this was a heinous act, right? Heinous act. Probably because of the soul tie to that person was very, very strong. And so it overrode, and it's possible, right? And it could have just overridden that common sense thing to go, that he should not have done that. That's awful. Why would you do that? But she wouldn't disavow it. She defended her husband for the longest time, right? Unnatural soul ties, unnatural bindings. Proverbs 5:22 says, the iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he is held fast in the cords of his sin. And think of great example, think of Lazarus when Jesus raised him from the dead. When Lazarus came out, he was still bound up in his death clothes, right? He needed help to be unbound, right? So with sin comes death. We are bound up in that. And the sin that we are bound up in, we need help to get unbound. And that help has to come from God. Because again, it's a spiritual battle. Because a lot of us have God in our lives. We are saved, but we still have sin. We're still bound up by sin in our lives. We need help getting unbound, right? We'll talk about how to get unbound next week.